Our next presentation is the Sales Planning Challenge. Can it be done in 2 months? Joining me now is Joel Cartwright, Director of TPM Product Development at AFS Technologies, a provider of software and services for consumer goods companies. So without further ado, here is Joel Cartwright.
Thanks, John. Thank you for the opportunity, everyone, to speak with you today. As John mentioned, my name is Joel Cartwright. I'm the Director of Product Development for our Trade Promotion Management Retail Applications for AFS Technologies. Just some of my background, why are we listening to this guy today? I've been in consumer packaged goods for about 20 years. Companies starting out such as Sara Lee Foods, Sunny Delight Beverages, Kimberly-Clark, and then a few years back made the move to what I like to call the dark side of CPG, and that's the software side of the application. Our application focuses, excuse me, go ahead and advance the slide here, focuses on the full closed loop application of trade promotion management. What we're going to focus on today is a 2-week sales planning challenge. I like to challenge. Because where our customers start is they're typically doing the annual sales planning process in a couple of months. And I usually shock a lot of people when I say we can do it in a couple of weeks. For customers who utilize our trade promotion management software, they typically fall into what we call the Tier 2, Tier 3 side, although we do have customers who are on our larger applications who have a more complex sales planning process, but typically our customers are in that Tier 2 range, which means they're about $1 billion or less in annual revenue. So what they mean is they need an application that they can do the entire sales planning in one tool. These customers are typically working in an outside Excel spreadsheet and having to compile a lot of information. So what I'd like to do in some of the processes is to challenge them. Hey, can we do the annual planning in a couple of weeks? When they say, when they come back to me, they ask, what do I need? I said, you need your IT involvement. You need your IT group to be involved in the planning process because there is some integration that's needed from external systems. The external systems, what we find in our application, are typically the ERP system where the sales objectives of the annual plan is typically coming from, as well as the budgets. External applications such as the demand planning tool. Most importantly, it's coming from your consumption data, your Nielsen, your IRI, your consumption data, letting you know how your product's doing at shelf. Because from a planning standpoint, that's ultimately where we want to be, how my product moves the shelf. So as I mentioned, we have customers who are in that Tier 2 space who typically don't buy a robust amount of consumption data. So they have to rely on shipment data to help them best understand and do that sales planning. So always this discussion, what is the shipment versus consumption data? How typically our customers do that is they use a kind of a hybrid methodology. They have some sort of consumption data with their larger companies, and they apply those metrics to customers who they don't typically buy that volume from. So from that respect, they can apply a lift factor or a scenario lift factor to a company who does not have the consumption data, and they let that flow through from a shipment standpoint. They say, okay, I'm at 125 lifts, so I'm going to apply that same methodology to my shipment-based customers. Can it be done in the application? And what can be done in the application? The idea with a tool such as ours or in the marketplace is you want to eliminate offline spreadsheets. Now, that's the component of the planning process that typically is what's drawing it out year over year. A lot of hands in the cookie jar, a lot of versions of this type of Excel spreadsheet are floating around, and the necessity to make sure you get one roll-up into the tool is typically making that Excel spreadsheet a pretty big worksheet and program. So the idea is to move the customers, our customers who will go on our software, out of the Excel world and into the application. As such, we challenge them with a 2-week sales planning challenge. So week 1, what does that look like? So we need to make sure our configuration within the tool is aligning to how we plan our customers. What we found as far as configuring and adapting an external planning tool into our solution, the gap is at what level the planning is done in the external application. The limitations in some TPM applications is the fact that those two planning levels typically don't line up. So what has to happen is decisions have to be made. So the ability to have a flexible hierarchy structure in your TPM tool as it relates to the Excel tool is a necessity. Having said that, I need to decide what level am I going to do my planning. So I'm going to do my planning at a build to or market to level, where I'm going to do my specific plans within the system. Same goes on the product side. Am I promoting in a specific promoted pricing group, brand level, category? How do I manage new item distribution? So that's where I need to encompass that into my planning process, new items, and at what level I'm going to be doing. The second component in week one, I need to understand how much money I have to spend. So I need to align my funding structure. And what we found is a lot of customers, when they're in an offline funding tool, there's a huge complexity as now as where the funding is coming from, because there's no way to isolate or segment the different buckets of money that the trade is accounted for on the general ledger. A TPM tool will give you the capability of extrapolating or breaking out the GL funding into a tool and be able to isolate how much money I would have to spend. So traditionally what we found when we first go on the application, we had to consolidate a lot of the thought processes on how they look at trade funding within the tool. Now I have one bucket of money that I can isolate to a specific customer if I need it, or a specific product group, brand, or category. So align funding to how it can work in the tool. The biggest thing I can offer is to simplify the funding structure. The second component regarding aligning the funding is understanding my funding process. How am I going to look at trade? From an accounting perspective, I just need to look at a trade, or I'd like to look at trade, from a live accrual basis. I ship a case of product, I bank some money, I use that money to spend on my trade events. Some of our customers want to get to that type of live accrual. That way they're getting a more proof of performance out of their trade market. The issue is, from an accounting perspective, it's tough to book accrual because typically shipments, as you know, and product sales doesn't align to when the event may execute and the spending may execute. So having said that, I may book the accrual based upon the volume one month, and then the expense comes in the other month. So there is a way to migrate this, but you then have to understand my spending accrual, which is the second component to align, the third component when talking about aligning funding. A lot of our customers look at accruals from the spending perspective. How much money am I going to spend? And it's difficult to manage this because now I have this large spending unknown in the form of deductions sitting out on the general ledger. But those decisions have to be made on how I want to do the accrual and align on the funding structure at the beginning of the sales planning. A lot of our customers use a hybrid between the two. They use a live accrual based upon sales, and then they compare that to a spending forecast as kind of a litmus test. They look at that in the planning time, in their annual planning process, from a forecast perspective, and then they true that up as the plan comes to fruition. Then understanding the tactics and bringing in my marketing component. What tactics am I going to run? So understanding from a marketing perspective on what's the most efficient way to deploy my trade activity. Is it a feature? Is it a display? How many PPRs do I have to get in a certain period? What about my ad duration, coupons, etc.? Creating and aligning these tactics to the marketing group is important. One of the biggest ahas we find when customers go on a TPM tool is the alignment between the marketing plan and the sales plan. So aligning those tactics together and creating them in one source can help align to your retailer calendar. Finally, on the configuration in week one is understanding the business rules. What's my KPI? What's my margin requirements that I have to hit in order to deliver a specific contribution plan? What's my net unit cost? While working in an external system, this is rather difficult because there's a lot of moving components and overlapping trade events that you may not have. What we found is customers manage to a certain net unit cost, the KPI. And having a TPM tool be able to get you to the net unit cost by overlaying trade dollars as it relates to the tactics that I just mentioned, TPR, feature and display, and getting it down to one number. Because at the end of the day, if I'm an account manager in the field, that's what I'm managing to, one specific number. So defining these business rules up front and aligning them to the tactics, funding, and the hierarchies provide the data inputs an account manager would need to put together a plan. It sounds like a lot of work, but I would bet a lot of these already exist. The issue is they're existing in multiple sources. Getting them into one system that has vision by everyone within the organization is important. Once I have this configuration completed, I need to train my users and understand how to use the tool in the business process that I defined in the configuration above. Because ultimately, as an account manager in the field who's doing the planning, I need to understand how I can get to this information and how I can put this into a system. So train the users on your business tools and your processes. Simplifying, keeping it simple, simple, simple. Once the plan is put together in the configuration, the user can then build the plan within the tool. What our customers find on the solution, typically the biggest benefit from the annual planning process is found in year 2. They're able to see how the plan year performed, as well as able to copy and move plans forward. Customers essentially who utilize a lot of our software, who are again in that tier 2 space, typically are running the same plan year over year. It's an adjustment to a TPR here, it's a realignment to a retailer calendar there, it's adding a feature and display in one segment or one that's taking one away. So essentially they're running the same plan year over year. So once that plan is created, now we can do the internal buying and selling of the plan, the top-down, bottom-up plan. So I know my S&OP, what I need to deliver from an operating plan perspective. And once I've built my plan, I can then in turn go in and compare the plan I built to the S&OP, taking me to the next point of adjusting my sales and spending forecast to align to the plan. Go back to the organization to see where I need additional funding in order to deliver a plan, thus identifying gaps to the plan itself. I know it sounds like a lot, but again, all these components would be available to you already. Again, it just needs to be in one place. So week 1 is in the books. After week 1, I have my funding aligned, I have my hierarchies in place, my tactics that I want to run, what business rules I have to follow in order to deliver the plan. I understand how to put it into the TPM tool or the processes as well, and how that plan is going to look. I've already begun the comparison in the process of comparing it to the S&OP and adjusting the plan. Once the top-down plan is not aligned with the AOP, it can then be pulling out, as I mentioned, and calling out the risks, and more importantly, the gaps and opportunities in plan. So now week 1 is building. Week 2 is now being more subjective to the plan and being able to analyze it and see which one is going to be the most deliberate capability within the plan itself. Typically what we're finding more often than not are opportunities within a plan. When customers go on a solution initially, they're really first identifying the risks to the plan, where my gaps are from my risks of not delivering the plan, or is there gaps in the volume against the objective. But typically in year 2, because they're looking at the combination of tactics, aligning the funding, and seeing where promotions are performing the best and plans are performing the best, they're able to call out opportunities in the coming year plan to say, okay, maybe I could go at 2 for 6 rather than going at 2 for 5. Maybe if I ran this ad 2 weeks prior to Easter, I'm able to get a little bit more understanding. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the consolidation of information into one place so that the account manager or the key account owner can make these type of adjustments and take advantage of opportunities. Opportunities additionally can be participation in an event that's truly incremental to your coming year. So understanding those opportunities. A lot of our customers need the ability to visually lay out how the planning process is going to work. Now, all the times than not, I present this planning process, customers going on the tool, is a foreign matter. It's a foreign thought process. Typically, it's residing in different areas in the store, within the organization. It ultimately is starting, as I mentioned, with what my corporate objectives are. These are my targets. This is what I have to hit. There's a room full of finance people that have promised to the bank and to the shareholders that I'll just deliver this growth target. Typically, that objective plan can be sent to either the sales organization, but more oftentimes than not, what I'm seeing now is it's coming through the marketing organization. So really brand ownership and brand management is coming through the marketing organization. Because they're best suited to identify what's the best at-shelf type of promotional activity to drive the event, to drive sales and volume. So it's then taking the corporate objectives and aligning it to the marketing plan. Then taking that marketing plan, you're aligning it to the brand plan, what the plan wants to do for each individual brand within the organization. As I mentioned, marketing is driving it. The cost centers are being moved to more of a brand recognition. What I'm also finding is that brand plan is then pushed out to an HQ sales planning organization, or folks that are creating the templates for the field to follow when creating their plan. So marketing driving into a brand plan, ultimately driving into sales planning for the acting organization. Pushing out a national plan template in the form of a planning calendar. The biggest thing with what we're seeing customers going on the application or opportunities that they're seeing is aligning and visually displaying what their plan looks like. A simplistic approach to laying out a plan in a grid format, providing the direction to the account managers in the field, the ability to say, all right, I need you to go and get 3 TPRs, 2 feature and displays in this time period and this time period. So giving the account managers in the field a starting point to go back to the customer. Now, we all know that the best laid plans are always laid to waste. So as the business planning component at the customer level, I have to take that plan template and try to align it to my retailer calendar. Keeping in mind, all this is being done in the solution. I'm not doing it in an external Excel template. All the information resides there. So I then begin the customer planning process. Once the customer planning process can then be taken out and presented to the buyer. This is what my organization would like to get from you, the retailer. But I'm going to have to align it to what the retailer expectation is. Specifically, the customers, as I mentioned, who are utilizing our solution, they may not necessarily be the category captain in their space. So they're going to have to adhere to some retail event activity. Now, in their hip pocket, they're going to be able to go in and say, hey, this is the post-event analysis that I've looked at to take a look at this event. It wasn't profitable for me. It didn't get the movement. So they can provide recommendations to the buyer on how to move their product. Because if they're moving their product, they can apply those same principles to the rest of the category. So customer business planning comes at this point very, very collaborative, which is being in the space a long time and dealing with a lot of customers who utilize our software. This is where it's going. This is what we're seeing retailers are hungry for, specifically in the Tier 2 space. With customers who are already having to deal with the Tier 1 customers, they're looking for fresh ideas on Tier 2 because they see that as the biggest opportunity for growth in the category. From the Tier 2 customers help driving the category, really moving the Tier 1s along. So putting that customer plan presentation together in the collaboration. Once it's agreed upon, that's now still in the system and visually available to the rest of the folks within the organization. So putting the customer plan in the tool, then those plans can be submitted. One of the other biggest things that we've seen when customers go on the tool and utilize it full for the sales planning challenge, they now push this information out to other areas within the organization. Other areas being finance, accounting. Most importantly, though, demand planning. Demand planning utilizing this planning tool to help create even a litmus test at the bare minimum, comparing what the trade plan is saying and what the demand planning solution is saying and what needs to be delivered with inventory. As optimization from a demand standpoint becomes even more prevalent, cost of goods, et cetera, it's important to make sure that we're producing the correct amount of inventory. So aligning the trade promotion management tool with the demand planning tool is really a huge step in what we're seeing here recently. Historically, those two applications perform separately. And as what we're seeing in our marketplace, we're seeing much more of a direct interaction between those two tools. Now, what we are finding is that traditionally, though, we're only seeing it for customers who are really going to move the needle from a demand standpoint, the Walmarts, the Krogers of the world. A truly incremental event for, say, a Walmart COMAC is really going to move the needle in a demand planning solution. But we're seeing more and more of an integration between the two, and that's what becomes important during the sales planning process. And all this is in one tool. Once I've gone and met with my retailer, I come back and I need to review my plan. And again, I'm in the tool. It's all done in that week 2, if I can get my appointments aligned, of course. Once my plan review is done, I can then finalize the plan, and we can bless it against the rest of the organization as our S&OP that's coming. By doing all this in one solution and consolidating all the information in one place, these are very simple things to do. The hardest thing is to move the cheese, to make folks get out of the Excel world and move into a live environment of the solution. Finally, aggregating up the plan and seeing that getting the blessing of the organization, we can in turn go to the execution of the actual plan itself. So that's looking at it really from a sales organization, looking at it from the marketing organization, from the top-down plan. But as I mentioned in the first week of the 2-week planning challenge, I had to get other folks involved within the organization. So at the same time all this is going on with sales and marketing, prior to the build-up to the planning, I had to get my IT resources involved.
Joel, before you move to the next phase of your presentation, a question came in the chat box from one of our attendees. How do you plan for new items in distribution?
Typically with a lot of what our customers, they do kind of a same as type of planning scenario. They're looking either again, same plan what that's done historically from a size and standpoint, from a size and maybe flavor standpoint, they're really looking only at the historical volume. If it's, which in most cases is just a line extension of a flavor. If I'm venturing into a new area of the store that I have no information on, they're looking at predefined modeling capabilities that a Nielsen or an IRI could provide to them. However, when our customers look at that, they take it as mostly directional. For the simple fact they're relying on the account managers who own the business, who sold the new item in, to ultimately make the decision what we think this item will do. The modeling components, as I mentioned before, are taking in multiple factors: cannibalization of other brands within the category, pricing components, performance from a seasonality perspective. So relying on those type of models help, but are only directional for the most part. At the end of the day, it's the account manager who has to make the decision. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Good question, which is the question I get asked a good bit. How do I model, how do I look at new items in my annual planning forecast? I think the biggest thing is you could pound your head against the wall of coming up with a number. Because if you ask 10 different providers, you're going to get 10 different type of modeling components. As an organization, you have to agree, okay, this is how we're going to look at this. And as long as we understand that that's the basis from our analysis going forward, that's really the best practice. Meaning saying, okay, we're all going to agree that the lift percentage, or the directionally, that's what IRI or Nielsen has told us. But I don't think it's going to be this much, so I'm going to base it on the perspective. As long as we understand where the number came from and analyze it going forward, that's really the best process we can do. Back to our IT resources. As I mentioned, there's a lot of integration that has to take place because typically, specifically our customers who are in that smaller space, they don't have the integration between the two. A good TPM application, however, will have the ability to integrate to other external systems. Base volume. Let's talk about base volume. I guarantee if I asked all the people on the phone how they derive baseline, I would probably get 82 different answers, which is the age-old question in TPM. How I advise our customers is to say, okay, let's agree on what base volume is going to be. Because at the end of the day, base volume is essentially a litmus test. It's my comparative against actualized volume to understand incrementality, ROI, lift. So agreeing on base volume. Customers are telling me that they derive base volume from everything that's not on deal to everything that's not on deal, inclusive EDLP or EDLC, something like that. I want to extrapolate temporary pricing reductions, etc. So understanding what that's going to come from. Our tools provide the flexibility to derive base volume from multiple sources. A lot of our customers derive base volume from the demand planning solution, and they pull that base volume forecast into the TPM tool. As I mentioned, that begins the litmus test to the applicator, to the ROI and incrementality of volume within the tool. Consumption data. This is always a difficult understanding on how to do data mapping for consumption data. I'm managing and working in a tool that's really designed for shipment-based type of planning. The hierarchy alignment is a pretty hefty data mapping exercise to get consumption data into shipment data. If you have a flexible enough tool that has a robust underlying technology, data mapping can be done relatively easy as a one-time source. Meaning if I can show in the TPM tool where Kroger Cincinnati is and aligning with how Kroger Cincinnati is reflected in Nielsen or IRI, I can align that data and use it as a one-time load. Base volume typically is a one-time load from a consumption data standpoint. So if I get Nielsen to tell me what my base volume is, I can load that into the tool. A lot of assumptions are done from the consumption data as well, because as I mentioned before, customers don't buy consumption data for all customers. They're only typically buying it for their larger companies. So it's kind of a leap of faith when loading consumption data for non-consumption data acquired customers, my smaller customers who I want to assume base volume is very similar to Kroger. The optimization data. This is always a question that gets posed to me in the industry. How do you look at optimization data? Optimization data is a black box. Where is this number coming from? I always tell folks to look at when you're looking at an optimization data from a modeling standpoint. You want the model to understand the causal factors that were specific to your industry, seasonality, cost components, etc. So understanding what those modeling factors are in the tool to again give you your base volume. When looking at, as a side note, looking at an optimization program, you want to look at the optimization application in a simplistic format. Because at the end of the day, I'm only looking for two data points coming out of the optimization tool. One, base volume. Two, lift factor. That's really all I want. And when I'm looking at this, I need to understand how that basic base volume component is derived as well as lift factor. But a lot of our customers will take an optimization base volume and load it in the tool. It's not widely regarded to utilize the base volume component from an optimization tool because the consumption data or demand planning, typically what we found is more accurate. So the IT integration of external sources can be a key component. At the end of the day, though, when you're loading demand data, consumption data, or the optimization data, our customers are still looking for the account managers in the field to take a look at that and say, does that make sense? Because it's ownership of the customer and ownership of the plan at the account manager level. So typically what our customers do is do a preload of a volume component for base and allow the account managers in the field to make those type of adjustments. The second component, as I mentioned, is the incremental volume. So understanding the incremental volume. If I have a good base volume file load, incremental volume to me is essentially the actual volume less the base. So I'm saying that 1,000 cases is going to be base, I get 2,000 in. That's easy math. 1,000 of those cases or units is now going to be incremental volume. So a lot of our customers start off with, if I have a good base volume, I'm really not going to care what IRR and Nielsen is telling me because I'm only going to get that for 2 or 3 clients. However, they do look at consumption data somewhat for their larger clients. We talked about for a new product. So from a modeling component, an incremental volume lift factor would be important on a new product launch. Now, the accountant in me would look at it, or from a finance perspective, I would look at the volume for a new item as purely incremental. So comparing the incremental volume, I'm looking at consumption data, I'm looking at historical data compared to the base, which to me, in my mind, is the best component on doing incremental volume forecasting. Because when I create a plan, I'm creating a plan to align my S&OP, and in that plan is promotional activity which contain incremental volume. Typically, I'm using a lift factor percentage as, again, a litmus test that I either A, can accept as my incremental lift based on the base volume, or I can override it because I'm the account manager, I know my customer. But the integration from the IT folks to help you get this information into the tool. Information formats can be anything from a CSV data file type or an XML file type that can be loaded within the application. So IT resources become very important because they bring the data element into the tool. Now, we've touched upon this a little bit, shipment versus consumption. Now, you draw your own conclusions, but working with many clients over the course of my life and in installing the application and hearing what functionality is, there's always a big controversy between when I do my planning, am I looking at shipment or am I looking at consumption? As an organization, you have to make the determination off the bat, how am I going to do my planning, shipment versus consumption? So again, if I ask all the folks on this phone how they do the type of, what data they need to do the volume, they're going to go either shipment or consumption. How I like to explain it to our customers who utilize the tool, you need to do a combination of both. At the end of the day, it's a litmus test. At the end of the day, when you're in the planning phase, it's a forecast. Until the plan executes, I really don't know. So I need to make the determination as an organization, what am I going to go out with? Shipment planning or consumption data planning? So they talked about the analytical measures within it, understanding what volume is. Sourcing my base volume becomes my litmus test comparing my incremental volume. How I look at it and how a lot of our customers look at incrementality, they're looking at actual versus the baseline they've loaded tool. So that becomes my starting point. The base volume is the most important data metric within the tool. And your base volume file load may not be right, but as an organization, you understand where it's derived from and makes your analysis that much better. From a volume metrics, what our customers are focusing on are 2 key components. What I've found during the planning process, and this is what makes planning kind of spread out over many, many months, you need to focus on 2 just basic components, an ROI percentage or my percentage of lift my lift factor as a dollar amount or as a percentage. Decide what my investment strategy is going to be. Decide on what my ROI factor. This goes back to the week 1, defining what my business rules are going to be. What's the good ROI? Understanding what that's going to be. What's a good lift? Because when I create and deliver a plan, I may have a measure. So when I ask companies, well, what's a good ROI or lift? I always get the response as an organization, ROI factor is X. So you have to make the determination as an organization what you consider is a good ROI, a good lift. We know events are not profitable. They're, for the most part, not profitable. But as an organization, we have to understand, will this drive category share? Will this drive my share within the category? And will it keep my category share going forward? So determine what your volume metrics are going to be. Again, part of the week 2 planning, I want to understand what my merchandising conditions are. We talked about that. What are the specific go-to-market strategies that we want to have? Feature, display, a combination of the 2, or temporary pricing reduction. Those merchandising conditions, similar to ROI, is I need at the end of the day, what % of volume am I going to get? What's my ACV? What is it going to drive? So understanding from the merchandising conditions, that's ultimately what I want to get. From my tactics, it's going to drive what percentage of volume and what percentage of ACV. So, what can be done in the application? Everything that I've described can be done in one application. The importance of that can be the fact that the application is updating in real time, 1. Point 2, everyone can see what's going on. Everything is one plan in one place. We can aggregate up to an organization and understand it. Eliminate the process of eliminating an external planning component. Let's get out of Excel. Let's get it all within the tool and make it the planning process more real. By eliminating that component alone, you can touch your planning process in half. And getting it into one application can help you adhere to the 2-week planning challenge. So eliminating the offline spreadsheets, eliminating the planning level capabilities, eliminating and aligning the merchandising events and rolling up into one plan in one place. So to summarize, the 2-week planning challenge is knowledge up front. Identify your data points. Understand what your strategy is going to be. Take the leap of faith of getting out of Excel and doing it within the application. It can be done. All the data points are there. When you understand that, you'll be successful in the 2-week planning data challenge. Time for questions,
Joel,
John?
Yes, we have one question here to wrap it up. What is the biggest data challenge relating to planning?
We actually talked about it. Somebody brought up the very good question. The biggest data challenge that we see is how do I plan for new items? And where do I get that information? You're typically, again, as I mentioned, you're relying on either one of 2 data sources. Historical, similar products, if it is a line extension or something like that. But if it's a leap of faith and a new item in a different area of the store, you're going to have to rely on some sort of modeling components or other products in the model to kind of better understand how to do that planning.
Okay, thank you, Joel. For more information about the information presented in this webinar, please visit afsi.com.